Thank you for joining, everybody. Thank you for Apollo Hospital. Thank you to the Chief Executive, Dr. Davison, Dr. Sahana, and the rest of the IT team at Apollo Hospital for organizing this very important event, mental well-being for healthcare workers. And I think this topic has been long overdue. While we've been faced with pandemic, we've been talking about all the physical and medical aspects of the coronavirus pandemic, but the mental health aspect has been not fully addressed, especially the mental well-being of healthcare workers who have been putting in all their efforts to look after the patient who might become ill and those who have become very sick. So with that, I would like to first introduce myself, Dr. Roshan Jain. I'm a senior psychiatrist at Apollo Hospital, and I've been with Apollo Bangalore for the last 10 years. And previous to coming to India, I was working in the United Kingdom, mainly in Nottingham as a senior psychiatrist, managing the crisis team. Since returning to India, I've been fortunate to work with Apollo and have been delivering holistic psychiatry and de-addiction services. Today's aims and objective of the talk is to understand the needs to address the psychological well-being, especially of healthcare professionals, especially doctors, nurses, and all the caring staff. Also consider ways to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on our well-being, understand the basics of anxiety, stress, and depression, differentiating between normal and illness grade conditions, and then speak about managing it for yourself as well as for your family members and for patients. And then we'll follow that by Q&A session, which will be at the end. I hope people will participate in entering your questions in the chat boxes, and I'll try to answer as many as possible. If I do miss out, you can contact me on the below email address, hello@roshanjain.com. And I would be very happy to answer your questions at length if I were to miss it today. Thank you so much. Before we start on, I'd like to give a big salute to the Corona Warriors. And these Corona Warriors are all the frontline workers who have been participating in helping each and every person in this country and around the world to allow people to carry on with their lives. And these includes the delivery personnel, the news people who got the right news, the cleaners, the police staff who are keeping our streets secure and ensuring restricted movements of people to prevent spread of coronavirus, nurses who've been providing 24/7 care for all the patients in variety of facilities, and doctors who has been the front runner in this pandemic, the front line, the first responders. So I'd like to thank all of them, and I hope that good work continues. But the good work can continue when each and every staff, each and every frontline worker, and each and every healthcare worker are healthy, energetic, and healthy in their mind and healthy in the body, so that the delivery of services can continue. Let's look at COVID timeline. Now, in January 2020, World Health Organization declared the outbreak of new coronavirus disease to be a public health emergency of international concern. By March 2020, WHO made assessment that COVID can be characterized as a pandemic, which means that the infection had spread world over. By July 2020, including today, worldwide, we've seen about 15 million people infected. Over 8 million have recovered, which is very good news. Unfortunately, over 600,000 people have died. And in India, we are just crossing 1.2 million, that is 12 lakh people are totally infected with coronavirus. And as many as 48,000 were tested positive just yesterday, which is a big number. And unfortunately, the pandemic is still raging. So this pandemic has posed an unprecedented challenge to our world. And this challenge is mainly because it's driven by uncertainty and unpredictability. It is the biggest crisis we have seen since Second World War. And it's not just a healthcare, but a humanitarian and economic crisis. What we've seen in the last 4 months or so is that we've seen a lockdown of the world, followed by unlocking and then relocking, and then more fears about further necessity for lockdown and other measures to prevent the spread of coronavirus. Over these 4 months, people have become very isolated, and people are breathing in fear. Coughing has become a taboo, and proximity to another human being has become quite anxiety-provoking. So this is quite a significant changes in our life, and I think this invisible enemy has wreaked enormous havoc on our previous ways of life. It has brought in behavior which is quite contrary to to human instincts, which is in times of crisis, we gather in solidarity, we support each other, and we are there for each other. But the corona pandemic has required us to stay away from each other, avoid people, avoid crowds, and disassociate with our society and community, essentially to prevent the spread of infection and to protect others. I'd like to start with some quotes. The health of those working on COVID-19 frontline must be a priority. Now, this is World Economic Forum, which is quite clearly recognized the need for addressing the health issues of frontline workers. Mental health issues following the COVID-19 pandemic stems from normal people being exposed to extraordinary situation, which is quite a pertinent thing to say. Widespread social and economic disruption of the pandemic has produced a psychosocial impact unheard in the modern times. So there are some pertinent quotes for healthcare workers and organizations, and these include: the coronavirus pandemic will almost certainly be a marathon, not a sprint. To continue to deliver the best possible care for its duration, we must support our staff from the very beginning. Another quote says that it is pivotal that we do not ignore the psychological impact that the outbreak has on individual and society, which is often a limiting factor for a nation to overcome a crisis. And then safeguarding the moral and mental health of healthcare worker can influence the success of healthcare delivery. Now, these quotes quite clearly identify how important it is to care for our staff, to care for those providing care, and care for those who are delivering this essential services during the time of a crisis. Why is the current situation so stressful for everybody? Well, coronavirus pandemic is alarming for many reasons. The situation is changing on a daily basis. The uncertainty is emerging and evolving. There's no clear end in sight, even after so many months. There's only anecdotal evidence of treatment protocols, and there's no vaccine in sight yet. This is topped up by a barrage of catastrophic news and proliferation of information about the virus, as well as an overdose of precautionary advice, which unfortunately is only few of them are factual, most of them are fake, and this has led to fear-mongering and paranoia. To add to all this, the lockdown has restricted our way of life, and we continue to worry about the significant aftermath that awaits us when the pandemic is over. When we look at COVID and mental health, there are specific features of COVID-19 which are responsible for mental health problems. And as I mentioned earlier, the speculation about its mode of transmission. After so many months, many are still unclear. The rapidity of the infection, there's a lack of definitive treatment protocols and vaccine. And more importantly, widespread global connectivity and extensive media coverage, which, for example, during the times of SARS and MERS outbreak, especially SARS outbreak in 2003, we didn't have such a media coverage. Therefore, the catastrophic reactions and news did not spread that quickly. But with such catastrophic reaction, healthcare professionals are somewhat protected because we have access to clear facts. And as I mentioned at the bottom, facts minimize fear and knowledge is power. We do need to talk about the psyche, the mind, and why? Because much emphasis has already been given to the biological and physical domains of mental health. International and national agencies have unleashed an infodemic, which is a lot of information about the problem, which is making it difficult to focus or identify clear and succinct solutions. Unmet psychological needs is neglected or sparingly addressed by the government and government agencies. Say, for example, NIMANS introduced guidelines, WHO introduced guidelines for addressing the mental health of the general public per se, but there is no specific or emphasized protocols on addressing the mental health of healthcare workers. Perhaps this is driven by stigma, as we have always been body and bodily ailment focused and less so mind focused, because bodily ailments are visible and ailments of the mind may not be visible, therefore they are not considered. Healthcare professionals, on the other hand, are also assumed to be resilient, to be emotionally capable of managing work, life, and new challenges and stresses, perhaps by the virtue of their profession and perhaps by their exposure and experience to life challenges and stresses. But this focus on the body as compared to the mind is perhaps undermined by or underpinned by an assumption that we are immune to stress. Perhaps we are not. We are as human as anybody else. And when you look at organizations, even the non-medical organizations are requesting for stress management and mental health awareness programs on an ad hoc basis. There's no structural program across various organizations. And when it comes to healthcare organizations, such a request are even more rare and remote, which is rather surprising. It's important to understand physician burnout. So I say burnout is everywhere, but you can't fight an enemy unless you recognize it. Therefore, it's important to recognize as a physician that a burnout is possible and one can get exhausted. Physician burnout has been classified as a psychological syndrome that can be expressed as a prolonged response to due chronic occupational stresses. Physician burnout affects a wide variety of individuals, from medical students to practicing physicians. Surveys of doctors found that an overall physician burnout rate was about 44%, which is very high. And I think the good news there is that the physician burnout rate has reduced from previous 50% to 44%. And with 15% saying they have experienced colloquial or clinical forms of depression, so which is pretty high. Okay, so physician burnout is not good. It's bad on multiple levels, bad for doctors, bad for their families, bad for the staff and patients, and importantly, bad for organizations, because it can affect the quality of service delivery, and it can affect patient care. And burnout is everywhere and it's all the time. Therefore, it's important to recognize it, because it can take a toll at various levels. There is a need for various prevention and treatment strategies that has to be developed, not just at the individual level, but team level and organizational level. So COVID and mental health, this epidemic has caused a severe and variable psychological effects on people. In general population, this can lead to development of new psychiatric symptoms and worsening of pre-existing illnesses. So irrespective of getting exposed or being infected, people can develop a fear of falling ill or dying, excessive worry or anxiety, helplessness, tendency to blame others who are ill. So the psychiatric illnesses that people develop include depression, anxiety, panic attack, somatic symptoms, as well as post-traumatic stress disorder, to extent of delirium, psychosis, and even suicidality. So a wide variety of impact on individual and psyche and the mind. Healthcare workers, especially those who are working in emergency units, in intensive care facilities, in infectious diseases ward, are at higher risk of developing adverse psychiatric consequences or impact. Now, this has been found from studies looking at disaster and looking at previous outbreaks like MERS and SARS. And what they also found is that emergency staff are at higher risk of developing post-traumatic stress disorder. Risk of heightened stress, emotional impact, and trauma, and high levels of depression and anxiety is also notable. And it is suggested that this is due to increased risk of exposure, fear of infecting the family, as well as a conflict of balancing act between professional duty, altruism, which is care for the others, and personal fears, fears of catching infection and fears of transmitting the infection to the family members. So not just the doctors and the nurses are at risk, other healthcare professionals are also at risk. Firstly, we'll also look at other specialties. Respiratory medicine, physician, and surgeons are at higher risk as compared to other specialties, for example, like psychiatry. And when people are experiencing burnout or high-risk group, they report fatigue, poor sleep, worries about their health, and fear of social contacts, despite confidence in the infection control in the hospital. Other high-risk group include nurses, care workers, occupational therapists, personal assistant, registered managers, social workers, caterers, cleaners, and all those who are playing a crucial role in addressing people's need during this challenging time. Unfortunately, the other staff might have little or no training in how to prepare or cope with the emotional impact of such difficult environment. And there's been notable finding that nurses have higher rates of anxiety and depressive symptoms compared to doctors. So why is it stressful for healthcare workers? Well, it's unlike anything we have seen in our lifetime. It's a high octane situation. The hospitals have transformed. The nature and flow of the work has changed. Many of the colleagues are now taking ill. Unfortunately, some are dying. There's a significant loss of income and workflow for the doctors as well as the hospitals. Staff are overworked. There's undue demands, undue pressure, undue expectation, even during this challenging and worrying times, and doctors are finding it hard to fight a prolonged battle against a deadly, highly contagious illness which has no known cure yet. To add it all, professional repercussions of speaking candidly and openly are well known. Therefore, people keep quiet and bottle up the emotions, which has negative consequences. I'm sure everybody can relate to this image. I put in here the first thali, then thali, followed by diya, and then kali, as always. So the doctors and patients, or doctors and patients and hospitals don't have such a good relation as it used to be. And sometimes doctors start to think whether the noble profession is becoming a not able profession. Let's look at the risk factors for psychological ill health. Studies have clearly shown that the risk factors for psychological ill health, especially from understanding the impact of disaster on mental health of medical responders, show that where there is lack of training, where there is lack of social support and communication, and where there is maladaptive coping strategies in individuals, then the psychological ill health is more likely. Let's remember a few things. Feeling pressured by current situation is normal. Feeling stressed is not a reflection that you cannot do the job and does not indicate weakness. Keeping all staff protected from chronic stress and poor mental health during the response means that they will have better capacity to fulfill their roles. And protecting long-term occupational capacity is essential for all hospital and healthcare facilities to manage the situation. I want to move on briefly to talk specifically about stress, anxiety, and depression, as that will help not just doctors to recognize the symptoms in themselves, but also to recognize symptoms in those that they see, to recognize symptoms in their family members. So please bear with me for a few slides to go through important areas. So what is stress? Stress is a normal psychological and physical reactions to demands of life. So which means it's a completely normal reaction to demands of life. So when the demand are in keeping with your resources, then the one is not unduly stressed. But when the demands surpass individual resources, then it becomes unmanageable. Hans Selye, who is the father of stress research, defines stress as a non-specific response of the body to any demands for change. There are other definitions. Richard Lazarus, American psychologist and psychotherapist, defined it as a condition or feeling experienced when a person perceives that the demand exceeds the personal and social resources the individual is able to mobilize. Richard Carlson, another psychologist, very clearly said that stress is nothing more than socially acceptable form of mental illness. This is a stress performance curve, and most of the medics will be aware of having gone through this. So we all know we have been under pressures, and as the stress level increases, our performance also increases, and some level of stress actually is very, very healthy. In fact, it increases our attention, our concentration, our focus, and our ability to carry out and complete the task or complete the study, for example. So what we want to do is to be in the yellow zone, which is optimum level of stress, wherein we are sort of mildly stressed, but focused and attentive and able to carry out everything that we are required to carry out. There is a peak for everybody, and that peak once the peak is crossed, we start to get into the position of fatigue. And then you get into the orange zone, which is exhaustion, followed by red zone, which is anxiety and complete breakdown. So what one is required to do is identify that peak. So what is stressful for me might not be stressful for you, and what is stressful today for you might not be stressful tomorrow. So we need to identify when something is getting too much and when you're reaching the point of fatigue and when you need to step back and prevent progression to exhaustion and breakdown. This is what happens when you are going through stress, which is called as general adaptation syndrome, again defined by Hans Selye. And he said that when people go through stress, which might be real or perceived, they go through a stage of alarm in which the body goes into a stage of fight or flight reaction. This is when the stress hormone like cortisol and adrenaline are released into the body, the heart rate goes up, breathing goes up, and you go into a fight or flight. So either you are prepared to fight or you're prepared to run away from the situation. If the perceived threat or real threat continues, then the body goes into resistance stage, the levels of adrenaline remains high, and this can lead to a rise in blood pressure, a rise in in feelings of restlessness and so on. If the stressor resolves, then you go into recovery stage. Otherwise, you go into a stage of exhaustion or breakdown. So this is where person gets into illness. And with pandemic, for example, we are not able to resolve the stressors. Consequently, many will go into a state of exhaustion and breakdown. The key symptoms of stress you need to understand is that people react to stress differently. People react to pressure and fear differently. So it's important to recognize that people might be experiencing certain things like insomnia, difficulties in going off to sleep or having good quality sleep, or experiencing anger and irritability. Sometimes, often you experience fatigue, anxiety, traumatic stress, gloom and sadness or depression, and burnout, which is a state of physical and mental exhaustion. If any of these features are applying to you and you've been experiencing this on a regular basis, then I suggest you speak to somebody who will be able to listen. For example, if you're in a working professional in hospital, speak to your line manager or trusted colleague to say whether this is something that can be resolved or it needs further intervention. Moving on from stress, I would like to talk about anxiety. It's quite important to understand anxiety because pandemic has unleashed an epidemic of stress, anxiety, and depression. And there's been a spurt in emotional and mental health difficulties, a wide array of problems like adjustment disorder, psychosis, substance withdrawal state. Indian Psychiatric Society has clearly stated that there has been a 20% rise in mental health episodes. And what is worrying is that this might just be the tip of the iceberg. And there's fears that a full-blown mental health crisis may be looming upon us. It's important to recognize that anxiety is a prominent feature in each of the above listed difficulties. For example, 50% of people with depression have anxiety, and 50% of those with anxiety disorder have depressive symptoms. So anxiety is an underlying common feature in many of the difficulties. And importantly, anxiety can disrupt sleep and functioning and ability to remain rational, which is very much a requirement at this stage, calm or follow advice. So is anxiety always bad? Indeed not. It's a myth. Anxiety is normal and even helpful. As I mentioned earlier, it boosts our energy, focus, and mobilizes our anticipatory and adaptive responses to challenges and stressful events. It's common to experience stress and anxiety in context of transient life changes, such as anxiety remits with change in a routine, break, or relaxation. But relentless chronic stress can precipitate breakdown with the vast array of physical and psychological ailments. How does anxiety present? Well, they present with physical and psychological symptoms, as many of you will already know. And physical features include a feeling of racing heartbeat, trembling, sweating, headache, dizziness, giddiness, and so on. They also present with psychological symptoms, which is an irrational worry, fear, unease, or discomfort. But they can also have other features like apprehension about the future, catastrophic thoughts, and fearing the worst outcomes. They're associated with a sense of hypervigilance or an avoidance behavior. All of these interfere with day-to-day life. How does one differentiate between nervousness and anxiety disorder? Well, nervousness and anxiety is expected when person responds to real or perceived danger. But when the danger passes, nervousness resolves. So it's transient in nature. Whereas anxiety disorder is pervasive, is unremitting, which means it's continuous, is disproportionate to the situation, and it's irrational in nature. So for example, if a person hasn't been exposed, hasn't got any physical symptoms, and still constantly worried about having COVID virus and demanding to be tested, that would be an irrational nature of fear with COVID. Most importantly, in anxiety disorder, there'll be a significant dysfunctional state. So there are different types of anxiety disorder that people can present with and people might experience, including professionals. And one of them is generalized anxiety disorder. In this condition, the patient has generalized, non-specific, continuous anxiety, wherein they feel tense and anxious all the times, and they'll have catastrophic thoughts that are not situation or trigger specific. So which is very unlike phobia. So generalized anxiety, people are always anxious, irrespective of place or situation or circumstances. If you look at panic disorder, this is a more dramatic form of anxiety disorder where there's sudden severe bout of anxiety with marked physical and bodily features and psychological features. So they'll get an intense feeling of palpitations, shortness of breath, and fear that something bad is going to happen. They get a perception that they are going to have a heart attack. These are the conditions we typically go to emergency department, get blood test and ECG is done, following which, if they're normal, then one can make an assumption that it might be psychologically related. Phobic disorders are situation-specific anxiety. For example, the person feels anxious only in certain situations, for example, fear of height, or being in enclosed spaces, or being in presence of an animal, for example, a dog. So otherwise, the person does not experience any anxiety. Hypochondriasis is what we're commonly seeing during this pandemic. And herein, there's an unremitting anxiety of developing sinister ailment. And there's a concerns about developing medical condition that last despite unremarkable examination, investigation, and assurances by a medical professional. Obsessive compulsive disorder is also quite common during the pandemic. And herein, the person will get intrusive, irrational thoughts, usually of contamination or infection, followed by compulsive behavior characterized by excessive hand washing or cleaning or organization. During this pandemic, some of this is required by most of us. For example, to be vigilant about infections and to be repeatedly washing the hands. But in people with OCD, they would go on to wash their hands as many as 100 times a day. So that can be quite disrupting and that can be quite difficult with day-to-day life. Then we go on to say acute stress disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder. The difference between the two is the duration. So, and the person is exposed to, or experiencing or extreme and overwhelming traumatic events during which they felt intense fear, helplessness, and horror. Then they start to experience post-traumatic stress symptoms. So if the symptoms occur in the aftermath of an extreme event, within 30 days is acute stress disorder. After 30 days is post-traumatic stress disorder. And unfortunately, many of the frontline workers are going to experience post-traumatic stress disorder as they see dramatic scenes of people becoming ill, people dying, and people experiencing serious health complications. And then we see stress-related anxiety, which is basically presenting with psychosomatic symptoms or bodily manifestation of psychological problems, wherein they present with just headaches, body aches, dizzy spells, and there are hazards to anxiety itself. Depression and anxiety may take toll on your health as much as smoking and obesity. Study in San Francisco showed that people with high levels of anxiety and depression are at 65% higher risk of developing heart condition, 64% risk of stroke, and nearly 50% risk of developing high blood pressure. And despite this, anxiety and depression receives limited attention from general physicians. Understandably, they would not be wanting to recognize these very symptoms in their own self. But briefly about depression, it's characterized by continuous depressed mood, which is worse in the mornings, what we call as diurnal mood variation. So people feel worse on waking. They might feel better through the day, but in proper depression, the depression is worse in the mornings and it lasts through the day, through the evening and through the night. There's associated anhedonia, which is loss of interest in previously pleasurable activity, low energy levels, reduced sleep with early morning awakening, and the early morning awakening would be at least 2 hours earlier than normal. There's been reduced appetite with a loss of body weight of 5% of body weight in the last 4 weeks. There'll be poor concentration, poor memory, and equally there'll be a sense of pessimism, hopelessness, and in some cases suicidal ideation. Unfortunately, some will go on to end their life, feeling that the situation is hopeless and worthless and they might not get out of this. The symptoms are typically present for 2 continuous weeks and they significantly affect functioning at home, work, and otherwise. So how does one manage the risks to the psychological well-being? Well, we need to look at ways to mitigate the risk. We need to ensure adequate preparation and training. Not just preparation and training of the hospital facilities where you're working in, the department that you're working in, but to ensure adequate preparation and training for yourself, ensure that you are qualified and skilled and able to handle the situation that you're in sure that there's adequate equipment and resources in the facilities that you're working in order to feel less burdened and stressed and worried. Teamwork in such a crisis situation, especially in hospital settings, becomes quite essential, and building team resilience and creating a safe psychological and supportive space is quite important for each and every staff from top down to bottom up. one need to consider how the workplace might be able impacting on their well-being, both physical and psychological well-being, and how the team will provide support for each other, especially when under pressure. While working in settings like this, you need to set up good communication lines with your team colleagues, with your seniors, with the management, in order to ensure that all your needs are addressed, especially to provide a good, safe service. You need to maintain social connections, especially with your colleagues. And I can understand that many of your colleagues are being disconnected from each other, but thanks to social media, people are still in contact. But we need to maintain social connections within and outside the workplace, as this can help you unburden your worries and keep you up to date with the situation and up to date with the changing and ever emerging protocols. We need to practice and model self-care. So if we don't look after ourselves, then the patients are not going to follow our advice. You need to develop and adopt positive coping strategies, and which is quite important in terms of healthy lifestyles and so on, which I'll talk about later on. We need to enhance communications, especially at home with children, because as you come and work in a high-risk environment, your family will be worried about your safety. You need to communicate with the children that the pandemic is not as bad as it seems or is being sounded. You need to allay their fears. You need to address their questions. You need to reassure them that you're going to be safe. You're going to take all the precautions to protect yourself and the family, because if you assure them that you're going to be safe, then the family is going to be satisfied. You need to do the same with your partner, to say that you're going to take the highest level of precaution to keep yourself safe. You need to assure your parents that you're going to be fine, but also make sure that they are in a safe place and avoiding unnecessary exposure. There are other ways of mitigating risk post-COVID recovery for staff who are working in the COVID wards or infectious diseases ward. We need to start to appreciate and offer gratitude to the COVID duty staff, which is happening, but perhaps we need to do more of it, especially if you're in a seniority and supervising staff who are working in direct contact with COVID patients. You need to proactively contact absent staff, people who were on COVID duty and taken time off, to support them, to check on their updates, to check how they're doing, and this can be an enormous calming factor. You need to, those who have been at work or those who have been off work, those who have been off duty because of COVID, you need to have a planned, structured return to work, and this would apply to the senior management, to the HR, to other senior colleagues who would have their colleagues return to work, have one-to-one talk on a regular basis about the feelings and emotions of each other, especially within the teams, so that you can be unburdened. Within yourself, consider secondary stressors, other aspects. Secondary stresses could be loss of income, loss of quality of life, loss of other ability to de-stress and take a break, for example, that we could do previously and not able to do now. Look at how these factors are affecting your general well-being. Take time to reflect on how you feel and how you're managing yourself and how you're managing your health. There are many ways of managing psychological well-being, and one of the ways of that is to build resilience. And I'll talk about what resilience is, but building resilience requires various things. You need to build your connections, you need to foster wellness, you need to find a purpose, embrace healthy thoughts, and seeking help. All these factors can help one to build resilience. But firstly, what is resilience? Well, resilience is nothing but means that you face life challenges and stresses and you bounce back and recover. And in doing so, you enrich your life. And the key aspect in resilience, in facing challenges and stresses and bouncing back, is learning and development. And each time, as we face challenges and stresses, we learn, we become more capable of managing those similar stresses. And as medical professionals, as nursing professionals, we are well aware of how to manage challenges and how we bounce back and how we learned over the years. But it's important to remember that being resilient means you face the stress and not eliminate them. You learn from the mistakes, not avoid making them. And importantly, you rebound from failure. So these are very key elements. And as you keep doing what you're doing, you do become resilient, but there are other ways of actively pursuing and improving your resilience. And one of the ways of building your resilience is to foster wellness. And how do you foster wellness? By taking care of body, by taking care of your mind, and avoiding negative outlets. Taking care of body simply includes simple, understandable factors. You need to prioritize sleep. Sleep is designed to rest, to recuperate, and rejuvenate. And most people require about 7 to 8 hours of sleep at night. And when there is sleep deprivation, it affects not just our concentration, not just our memory and functioning, but it also affects our quality of life. So ensure that you prioritize sleep, you sleep and wake on time, and you ensure that you give enough rest to your body and your mind so that you are ready to face the challenges. And when you're rested, you are able to face challenges more effectively, and consequently, you develop resilience. Exercising becomes equally important in these pressing times. Many of the healthcare professionals, doctors, nurses already exercise, engage in fitness, but when we advise people or when we do it upon ourselves, we need to say that there need to be at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise per week, which is about 30 minutes for 5 days per week. Anything less is not seen to be very, very effective and doesn't bring positive changes in your body and mind. So regular exercises and the nutrition and hydration is also equally important. So when you look after your body, you are able to face the physical challenges, and consequently, you will be able to better face emotional and mental challenges of your day-to-day life and pressures and stresses. Next, we need to practice mindfulness, which is essentially to look after our mind. And this can be done by mind journaling, by writing down and reflecting things that you do, things that you enjoy, things that you find difficult. And journaling can help you to not just reflect on what is going well and what is not going well, but it also gives you an opportunity to reflect at a later date about how you felt at a certain time in the past. So it provides you with an ever-ready feedback material about yourself, about your responses, and what you did, what worked and what didn't work. So journaling is a good way of getting closer to your mind and emotions and thought processes. There are other ways, for example, yoga, which can bring a good harmony between the mind and the body. So it is designed to synchronize the mind and the body, and a good amount of yoga done on a regular basis can help you to face the day-to-day challenges in a more effective manner. And then we have time-tested method called meditation. And meditation is, people have misconceptions about meditation. Many think that meditation is sitting down and concentrating. It's not. It's also not emptying the mind. Meditation is about becoming aware of your emotions and awareness about your thoughts in a non-judgmental manner. So becoming aware of your thoughts and allowing them to pass without judgment, without interruption. And when you do that, you start to experience the gap between the thoughts. And that gap between the thoughts is pure silence. That's what meditation is. The more of the gap you experience, the more meditative you become. And when you are able to practice meditation on a regular basis, you will experience tranquility and you'll also experience clarity. And what we know from research and what we know from practice is that when we meditate on a regular basis, then we have clarity. And when you have clarity, you have calmness. What you also need to avoid is negative outlets, to avoid any maladaptive coping strategies. For example, smoking, for example, drinking or taking drugs, or taking tranquilizers or hypnotic to just feel well or to feel relaxed. These doesn't promote resilience. This doesn't promote wellness. This is just delaying an inevitable of the physical and psychological impact of stresses and pressures. We need to find a purpose by which is also another way of building resilience, and find a purpose. One of the key aspects is acknowledging and accepting your emotions. We know that denial and avoidance of negative emotions, difficult emotions, is not a good strategy for feeling calmer. You need to acknowledge and accept emotions, because when you acknowledge and accept, that becomes a prerequisite for change. It's only when you acknowledge and accept your emotions, then you can start to look at how you need to deal with the situation and what you're going to do next. You need to develop some small and realistic goals. So when in pressure and stress, we can feel quite muddled and chaos. And when there is a lot of chaos outside, there can be an internal turmoil, and we can feel muddled about what we're doing and what we want to do. So develop small realistic goal, take up activities, break it down into simple activities, accomplish them and build on those. So small goals, break down the activities, achieve it and build on it. So that's can make you more and more resilient to make you feel that you can do things even in difficult times. Look for opportunities for self-discovery. Crisis is a time for introspection. Crisis is a time for learning much about yourself. Crisis is a time for understanding the way you respond to things, the way you respond to situations, the way you react to external reality. So it is a time to discover yourself and to bring about the changes. And as we all know that helping others and being compassionate can bring about a lot of resilience in your mind and a lot of positive thoughts and a lot of changes in your behavior. Build your connections. This is one of the strongest aspects of resilience, is that when you have a strong family network, when you have a strong social network, when you have a strong support network, then you are much more resilient because you don't feel alone, you feel supported, and cruising through the difficult times, cruising through crisis can become easier. So what I suggest is you prioritize relationships, and in these times of lockdown and social distancing, I think you need to prioritize relationship, enhance your connections, and connect with all the people that you wanted to connect and resolve the unattended matters. You can join a group, and many people are already in various groups, but groups which have meaningful discussions and groups which have meaningful talk would be quite helpful in terms of developing resilience. Most importantly, among medical professionals, we need to accept help and support, which we often deny ourselves, and that is quite unhelpful. Accepting help is as good as accepting your emotions. So when we recognize that we are vulnerable and that we can manage things, and when we also recognize that there are times when we can't manage it, that's when we need to reach out, and that will help you to build resilience. And then you need to embrace healthy thoughts. And the first aspect of embracing healthy thoughts is accepting change. So when you accept change, then you move on to find alternative ways of dealing with the situation. You need to learn from the past, not just brood or worry about the past or feel guilty or regret about the past, but you also learn from the past. So as I say that, we live life ahead, but we look back and learn from our past. You need to keep things in perspective. When people are anxious and people are overwhelmed, then everything can seem quite catastrophic. Everything can seem in a turmoil. So you need to bring keep things in perspective in order to become rational and in order to become clearer. Optimism can play a very important positive role during times of crisis, because during crisis, when the mind is anxious, it has a tendency of catastrophizing, worrying about what would happen, what might happen. So being optimistic simply makes you feel that things is not as bad and things might get better. So, and being optimistic simply means that the thoughts have a very clear bearing on our feelings, and the feelings have a very clear bearing on our behavior. So if you have positive, optimistic thoughts, then you feel better, and then consequently you behave in a more rational and appropriate manner. And some of the other factors of managing psychological well-being, especially during such a crisis, is to declutter your mind, to change your mindset, to grab the opportunity, and where necessary, seek professional help. So when talking about decluttering your mind, I suggest you start reducing consumption of news, social media posts, and information, because the infodemic has had significant negative consequences on our psychological health. It has also led to fear mongering and has limited our abilities to be doing the right thing. For example, people have been told to only follow 3 things: wear a mask, wash your hands regularly, and stay away from crowded places. Most people are not able to follow a simple instruction. They're doing everything else other than doing these 3 things. So therefore, cut down your information so you can focus on what is necessary. Updates are important. Try to get updates from 1 or 2 credible sources and have a limited time duration for getting those updates. And that way you'll minimize clutter in your mind. As I mentioned earlier, clutter is the enemy of clarity. So try to declutter. Changing your mindset. So it's negativity and pessimism everywhere, and it's quite infectious. And we often underestimate the power of positivity. Try and remember to say that you're not alone. We are all in this together. You're not stuck inside. you're not isolated. It's just an opportunity for us to reflect and help ourselves rest, reorganize, and rejuvenate. If you do consume news in a balanced way, shift the narrative from negative to positive. For example, look at the recoveries as compared to the infections, and look at people who are getting well as compared to deaths. See opportunity in a crisis to change, to transform, to get creative, to attend the unattended, especially in relationships and conflicts, and to spend time with those who care about you. I would like to come to the last few slides. As a psychiatrist, I think this is very, very important. Venting is very, very therapeutic. And I always tell people that a problem shared is a problem halved. So talking can significantly minimize your burden. And when you talk, you feel much lightheaded and lighter in your heart. And you move from being problem oriented to solution oriented. And this is quite important to remember, to say that as you talk, you start to look at solutions because you're already addressing the worries that you have in your mind. And off and on, we do the talking with our family members, but I think gossips and random chat doesn't unburden you. In fact, it's quite the contrary. And this is what we are seeing on social media now, is that it is actually burdening people rather than unburdening them. Advice from family and friends can be quite helpful, and in many cases, it works very well. But advices from family or friend can be quite untimely, and the family and friends would be quite keen to give you advice before they hear you out. So that's a negative side, that being told what to do before you're being heard. Therefore, professional talk is better than random chat, and overwhelming worries is best addressed by experts who are independent, objective, and will give only timely advice. So for example, a psychiatrist or psychologist will listen to you much before giving you any advice or suggestions to bringing about changes. So, and in most cases, just talking through your difficulties itself can lead to resolution of a problem. And professional help doesn't just mean talking to professionals when you're ill, but it can be before you become ill and way before, to do something that you already do well, to do better. Okay. And so professional help may include education and support. It can mean counseling and therapy. So what is psychotherapy? And psychotherapy is an interaction between professional and a client that leads to changes from less adaptive to a more adaptive state. And the changes in clients' thought, feelings, and behavior are different. And there are many types of psychotherapy. The bottom ones, the cognitive behavioral therapy and supportive psychotherapy, deals with the here and now, the current problems and how you feel, the symptoms, for example, and to bring about changes in symptoms in order to bring about changes in your behavior and feelings. Whereas psychodynamic and psychoanalysis deals with the past problems that is having impact on the present situation. So during crisis, we probably look at more here and now therapies, but psychoanalysis would be applicable to all patients who are willing to deeply introspect and bring about a lasting change in their attitude and perception and thought processes. And finally, medicinal treatment. You can prescribe tranquilizers, but it's not advisable to take tranquilizers on your own where possible. Always seek help, or at least ask your colleague. If you do take tranquilizers, then it's diazepam, lorazepam, or alprazolam. Small doses, usually 0.25 to 0.5. Lorazepam are the same doses. There's a tendency for physicians to prescribe bigger doses for others and also for themselves. But I suggest you start with small doses and taper it up as required, because you don't want to make people sedated. If in some cases people just have insomnia, then give zolpidem. Comes in the name Zolfresh, 5 or 10 milligrams. Again, start small and then build up the dose if required. Do not exceed the maximum doses. And these 2 tablets can be quite, tranquilizers and hypnotic can be addictive. Therefore, try to avoid giving them beyond a few weeks, because not just a person develops psychological dependence on these tablets, but they become physically dependent, just like smoking and alcohol, and it can be quite difficult to get them off it. Melatonin is a natural supplement, comes in the name of Melocet. 3 or 6 milligram can be given. It's non-addictive, and it can be quite helpful in improving the quality of sleep and also the quantity of sleep. It works slowly, but it can be quite an effective way of improving the overall sleep quality of an individual. In some cases, when a person goes on to develop anxiety and depressive disorder, antidepressant can help ease off the symptoms of anxiety and depression. Importantly, to remember, antidepressants are not habit forming and ideally taken for 2 to 3 month duration, not for weeks or days. They're taken for 2 to 3 months because they start to take full effect only after 4 weeks. What is very, very important to understand is avoid combination medicines. For example, a lot of people prescribe and some tablets which has the name of Fort or Plus and so on. These have antidepressants and tranquilizers, which means that you're giving them antidepressants and tranquilizers for long duration, and it might be difficult to get them off it because the tranquilizer would be addictive, but the antidepressants are not. So give them, if both are required, then give them separately because you can wean them off one of the medicines which is not required in a timely and effective manner. So avoid combination medicines and debunk the myth for yourself and for patients that people do come off antidepressants. Most people do. Some people with a very heavy genetic loading would require to take antidepressants for a long period of time. But a good number of people come off the medicines. Okay, and in these times of crisis, it is quite an effective way of providing care. Physicians are able to do that now, but psychiatrists and psychologists can provide video consultation quite effectively. And for those who might be or might not be aware, the Video Medical Council of India, in partnership with Niti Aayog and Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, have legalized telemedicine, and from 25th of March 2020, and they are clearly in the gadget information offered benefits of telemedicine, which says that it increases timely access to appropriate intervention, including faster access and access to services that may not be otherwise available. So video consultations are quite a good way of getting discreet, confidential consultation in the comfort of your own space, in the comfort of your own home. And that applies to all healthcare professionals, doctors, nurses, and other carers who can seek help in their privacy without worrying about stigma and without worrying about the repercussions of disclosing their mental health problems. So in conclusion, I would say that most people need to take stock of how the body and mind is responding to the stress and challenges and difficulties that we're facing, and to start to take action, remedial action, to avoid an overburdening impact of the stress of the current pandemic on their minds and on their body. That's at an individual level. At an institutional level, I think it is important for hospitals and organizations to set up multidisciplinary mental health teams at hospital, at local, regional, and even at national level for dealing with mental health issues and providing with psychological support both for patients, but importantly for healthcare workers. And there also need to be a regular screening of medical personnel involved in treating, diagnosing patients with COVID-19, and this should be done for evaluating the stress, for depression and anxiety. And there are specific questionnaires that we can do to screen all the staff who are on the front line and who are the first responders. And there's a need for in timely fashion to address the mental health issues of healthcare workers, preferably in a psychotherapeutic means by a qualified professional, because in doing so, we will ensure that our staff are healthy, both in body and mind. And when they are healthy, then we will be able to deliver services in a safe and effective manner. And then we will be able to provide the care that is very much required in this pressing time. Thank you very much. And I think that brings to the end of my slides. Thank you for listening. And I thank again all the frontline workers, all the Corona warriors for providing all the care and ensuring that people are able to get on with their normal lives while you continue to work even during this pressing and worrying times. So thank you so much. Stay vigilant, stay safe, and stay active.